Welcome to The Finder of Lost Things, exploring your superpowers of trust, healing, and transformation, with me, Hannah Belton. My brother, Christian, disappeared in Mali, Africa in 2003. He disappeared without a trace. We lost his story, we didn't have closure, we lost so much. I was fighting and searching to find Christian when actually I just needed to sit in stillness and attract him in. I was so resistant to doing this, but I had to surrender. It's a process of trusting and finding the lost pieces and integrating them. This podcast will uncover the process that Christian and I went on to find the lost things, him, and to find the parts of me that were missing.
And we were destined from the start to tell our story into the dark, for we were born to a great white shark.
Hi everybody, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Do come in as usual, come and sit around in a circle. I've got a beautiful guest for you to meet tonight, it is my tonight. So you're going to meet a lady called Kerri Scott, and Kerri and I, Kerri's in Vancouver Island in Canada, and Kerri and I met through a mutual friend. One of those moments where the mutual friend said, "Oh, you do something like my other friend. Why don't you get in touch with each other?" So we did, and it's very, very obvious that Christian and Kerri's loved one in spirit were doing the bringing of us together. And as you hear Kerri's story, you know enough of Christian and I, our story, but you'll see the massive similarities between Kerri, Michael, Christian, and myself, and what we are doing, what we have done with our grief, and what we are now putting out into the world, I suppose, about our journeys and how we can serve other people. And also last week I was talking about like having a calling, and this kind of links really nicely into how your personal healing can like turn into a purpose and a service for other people, and on a much, much bigger scale than your personal healing, and how that can expand and grow, and how grief can be such a trigger for spiritual growth and personal growth. So I'd just like to introduce you all to Kerri. This is Kerri Scott. Hi, Kerri. Lovely to see you again.
Hi, thank you, Hannah. Nice to be able to join you.
Oh, you've got a gorgeous sunny morning. We were just saying, and we've had a hideous windy day all day, and now it's getting dark and wet and horrible. So I'm just looking longingly at that beautiful sunshine behind you.
You can come on over here. I've got lots of room. You can join me.
Oh my goodness. If I could, I would jump on a plane. And we all know how difficult that is at the moment. But anyway.
Yes.
Oh, so Kerri, would you like to, just sort of introduce yourself to the audience? Maybe you could start with Michael, who's your loved one in spirit, and just tell us a bit about him and yourself, and what sort of the grief that you were dealing with.
Okay. Well, I was sort of reflecting this morning when we met recently via Zoom. I think that's it's one of the first times that I've really felt seen with Michael present, because he came through you when we were talking, and it was a very pivotal moment for me in terms of my own understanding of what's been going on. And I do honestly believe since the moment I met him that I, have been connected with him for, lifetimes. It really felt like when we first met. And so his presence has always been so strong with me when he was living, and now since he's passed. And I've always kind of wrestled with that inside of myself as to what that is, what that connection is. And in my grief after losing him, I think it's something probably that in our more likely in our Western culture too, we sort of struggle to push that away. We try and push the loved ones that we lost out of our lives. And there's, the common expression, you need to let go and you need to move on. And so I try to do all this. And in my experience, Michael passed almost 2 decades ago. And I tried within all that time to do all these different things that sort of society expects you to do with that grief. And in that process, realized that grief can be something completely different, and to experience it in a way that you're embracing it and allowing it. And my personal realization, I think, when I learned that I was frozen in my grief and I wasn't processing it properly, and I wasn't talking to anybody about it. And it was a very, very private experience in my mind with Michael. And I kind of didn't feel comfortable telling anybody about it because I didn't know what their response was going to be. And in our living relationship, it was it was a short but long distance relationship, and not very many people knew us together. And so when he passed, nobody was reaching out to me to check in how I was doing. And as time went on, it seemed almost ridiculous to talk about it. But in my mind, it was such a big thing and such a pivotal experience. And the more I sort of realized the importance of our relationship, the stronger, he would come to me in terms of the thoughts that I was having and the experiences that I was having. And so that's just, I don't know if that gives you a lot of information about who he was or what happened, but that's kind of the experience that I've been living for 20 years, basically. And now I'm at a place where I'm accepting that and allowing it, and being able to talk to you and meeting someone like you who understands what it is that I have been experiencing has been such a blessing to be able to open up about it and be vulnerable and allow other people to talk about their experiences. So
yeah, because we should probably just explain to the audience, Michael, he committed suicide, didn't he?
He did.
Which in 2002, is that right?
Yeah.
And this was after you'd been together, so you had a quite a short relationship in terms of how you were meeting physically, and then you had a long distance relationship. But he actually committed suicide sort of 2 years after your relationship ended.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which kind of explains, people might have been wondering why you weren't sort of involved in the grief, and why people weren't asking you. So it's so interesting because I think lots of the audience are going to resonate with this, because I know, like, if you have a best friend, say, who passes over, or you have a school friend who you used to know who passed over, or somebody's touched your life but you haven't necessarily been with them when they've died, or you haven't been a huge part of their relationship, because that leads, I mean, what I really want to kind of, you were saying you were stuck in your grief and you didn't have any way of processing it, much like myself, under different circumstances.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
What was so difficult to like, what was the main reason for your grief being so stuck?
I think there's many reasons actually now that I understand it better. But the first part was that, like you said, we weren't together when he passed, and so I wasn't his girlfriend at the time. I wasn't his wife. I wasn't in his life. I mean, we talked on the phone a few times, but leading up to it, it really took me by surprise. And because it was a suicide, again, there's this level of uncomfort in our society that really puts death by suicide, kind of sweeps it under the rug, for lack of a better word, right? And it makes it so silent, and it doesn't get talked about because it makes people uncomfortable. And I mean, death in general tends to make people uncomfortable, and then grief is another uncomfortable topic. And so, we just aren't having the conversations that need to be had. And so with Michael, he passed, and what was it, a year before his death, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And again, the idea of mental illness playing a role becomes another confusing factor. And so I never went to his funeral or his memorial service. And I think that there's only really been one of his close friends that I've talked to about his passing since he's been gone. And that community really dispersed. And my sense is that I'm not the only one that struggles with his loss and is missing him on this deep level, because he was such a big person, such an amazing person in life and in spirit, that I think the tragedy of his passing was just so shocking to the community. And so there's all these questions that come into play, especially with suicide, is like, what could I have done differently? What could I have done to help him, or to have been there for him, to support him? And there's so much about what happened in those last couple of years of his life that I've been sort of searching for the answers for. And a lot of my grief journey has been trying to find those answers through various means. And I can't help but believe that he has really led me to a lot of those answers, and to people like you, that he's connected me with, to be able to understand what it is that I long to understand, and then also to find myself in the process too. So
I'm actually so shocked, really, to be honest, that our stories are so similar. Michael's passing and Christian's passing were fairly similar as well, we're finding out as well, and the way that both of us just couldn't express our grief for different reasons, and all those questions and all those whys, and just there was no completion anywhere. There was nothing. It was all kind of open, and the guilt of could I have done something? Could I have made a difference? So do you just want to tell us a bit about Michael? I mean, you sort of said he was larger than life. I can imagine that Christian and Michael were very similar as well. I know that the love of music they have, and so can you just sort of tell us a bit, celebrate Michael for a moment, from what he meant to you, or what he maybe still means to you, but what he meant to you?
It's such a lovely thing to be able to do. Honestly, I don't get the opportunity to really talk about him very much, and so I appreciate this very much. He was just such a beautiful person. He had blue eyes, crystal blue eyes that just drew you in. And what can I say? I mean, anybody that knew him knows just how magnetic he was. He just, when he talked to people, he really listened. Like he just knew your soul instantly, and he was so open and so supportive, and just really I'm kind of blown away, to be honest. Like he just carried himself with such a confidence. He loved music. Like he said, he was a musician in every part of his being. He particularly loved drumming and village instruments, as they say. And often a lot of the experiences that people shared with him were in that musical environment, sharing, like being part of the drum circle together that he would lead. And I see him sitting behind his drum, and his posture is always just so perfectly erect, and the presence that he had in a room, just everybody was drawn to him. I mean, even in the article that was published about him on the day of his memorial service, they acknowledged that like women from all ages would be drawn to him. Like they'd just be magnetized to how good looking he was, and it was so much more than that. It was just the energy of who he was, that and how he carried himself, that people were just like flock to him to watch him and be in his presence. So and I mean, he just has this joyful and playful exuberance that really carried people. So yeah, very similar to Christian. I mean,
I'm speechless because they sound so similar. They could have just been like they could have just been twins almost. And so like all these beautiful things that you're talking about him, and he's obviously, I mean, we've already talked, we did have one Zoom call, and you described Michael as your twin flame. Now that's obviously a term which we've kind of labeled your kind of relationship. Can you unpick it a bit, what you mean by twin flame, and then I'll tell you why I think Christian and I are also twin flames. Now when you mentioned it, I was like, oh yeah, okay, that sounds like us. So can you sort of unpick what you mean by it?
I think like the terminology twin flame has been something that's really helped me understand our relationship, and it's not, I'm a little bit unsure as to where I sit with it now, but I know it's been so helpful in terms of moving me through this process. And so when Michael and I first sort of officially met, I had known him and of him pretty much since my childhood. And I think when he first really took notice of me, and we instantly connected, and the first time that we hugged, there was this incredibly powerful sort of flash of energy. Like I just remember being surrounded in like green light, and just a surge of energy that sort of sparked between us. And I mean, I will never forget that moment. It was unlike anything that I had ever experienced. And moving forward, we just sort of like fell into each other so easily. And after we stopped dating, I wanted to recreate that connection and that emotion in other relationships, but I could never find that same sort of connection. And so I didn't realize it at the time. And it wasn't until after he passed that my sister came to me with the idea of twin flames. And I'd known about soulmates, but the idea of twin flames sort of takes that up a notch or two, in terms of the sense that your soul is of, like, you share the same soul. And so at the time of the creation of your soul, it splits into two. And so my soul was one of these sparks, and Michael's was the other. And so when we came back together, there's that union, and that familiarity that is unlike any other connection that I've ever known. And so when I did some research and started reading about twin flames, so much of what I read made sense to the experiences that we had shared. Like we had this telepathic communication, and we would dream about each other and essentially visit each other in our dreams. And Michael was very much into lucid dreaming, and talked about it often and tried to teach me how to do it. And then like we shared the same birthmarks and the same moles, and both of us had a heart murmur, and there was just all these other sort of physical and I guess emotional, sort of spiritual similarities that really, really connected us quite quickly. And so the more I learn about twin flames, this other term called heart-centered awakening really resonated with me. And I feel like that's what happened when we first embraced, is that like our heart chakras just burst open, you know, and we had this huge flood of energy sort of release between us. And so that the heart-centered awakening is how I describe that experience now. And so in terms of how I have really grown spiritually since I started processing my grief, the twin flame dynamic, the idea of our souls being one, had really helped me sort of move into this idea of connecting with my higher self and being able to connect with his higher self. And so often when I would go into that quiet space, it was him and his voice that I could hear in my head. And I'm like, well, it makes sense then if we're of the same soul, that when I go into that place where I feel connected with my soul, that I hear his voice. And so so much of that has really helped me process the loss that I was feeling. So
yeah, so there's something in my head, like I'm remembering something when you're talking, and it hasn't quite come into my consciousness at the moment, but what you're saying is triggering something very, very deep and very, like, I know something further about this. But I was just going to say, so I know how my grief was, and I know everybody experiences grief in a different way. But you described it beautifully in that when you heard that Michael had passed over, like you felt part of you was suddenly missing. Can you sort of talk through what sort of pain you were feeling, or what sort of, that sort of missing element of you?
It was massive. I mean, I can remember when my friend called to tell me about his passing, and I mean, it's just like, I think in any loss situation, you just the silence sort of takes over the room, and it's all a blur after that for like weeks and months, and moving forward, grief is such a grief and mourning is such a powerful combination of emotions. And so I don't think I don't think I ever knew how to move through it and continue to, well, I don't want to say continue to live my life, because that's the that's the expectation, but like I just was never the same person again. I just stopped doing the things that I loved. I lost the joy in my life, I think, is essentially what happened. And like music, because it was so tied to him, I had a really hard time listening to certain songs, and like to be in a drum circle, like the thought of that to this day still is very, very emotional. Like, and I know he's telling me to do that I have to do that at some point, but I'm not ready. But it's coming. And there's other parts of my life that I just had to suppress, like anything spiritual. I couldn't allow myself to go there because he was there waiting on the other side of that. And for years and years, I wasn't ready to allow that part in. It was too painful. There was just too much hurt, too much emotion. And often, oh, my kitten, sorry, she's gonna make a fuss here. I'd have this recurring tsunami dream. And I finally realized that was she'll be okay when she sees me. She's deaf and she's blind. So.
Oh no, do you want to go and get her?
Let's see. Here, I thought it would be the dog that would interrupt us, but oh, there we go. Oh, there she is. Okay, she's gone.
Oh, okay. That's good. We'll keep that in.
But I had this just reoccurring tsunami dream. She's not looking at me. What is she doing now? And I think it was really symbolic of the grief that I felt and was living within, suppressing, because I wasn't communicating it to anyone. And it was just all inside of me and in my head. And there was no outlet to talk about it. And so like I said, I stopped doing yoga because, when you get into that still space of rest at the end, I would always just be so flooded with emotion, tears just soaking me, that I couldn't be in public. I didn't want to be that emotional, and that I didn't want to be that hurt and that like show that amount of grief in public. And so there were things, and another one, going to church is so difficult for me now, because his family and it was such an important part of that. And his name is in the hymn books. And so it's just such a powerful present there that I can't go there and sing, because the emotion is so strong. And I think I'm finally getting to a place in my life where I've processed a lot of that. But for years, I just buried it and buried it and buried it. So I wasn't living life. I was merely just moving through it, and coping as you've talked about,
and the thing is that when it's been so long as well, people don't talk about their grief. People just expect, especially if you hadn't necessarily, lots of people hadn't known you were together, that's what the hell do I do with all of this? There's just no outlet, and not being able to talk to people. And I know I'm being led actually into what you're doing now. You've written a book, which I've had the privilege of reading. I know it's not out yet. It's in final draft sort of editing stage. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. It touched me. So many places I was like, oh, that's a perfect description. You've got such a beautiful way with words, and how you're expressing your grief and how you've uncovered. So what I want to ask you is, why did you start writing? Was that the outlet that was possible for you?
When I started writing, I was writing a very different book. And I didn't know at that point that there was this grief that was needing to be processed. And I knew there was a couple significant moments. And one of them was on my 40th birthday, where I went into a sensory deprivation tank. And I thought that would be the most amazing experience to give myself turning 40. And at the time my children were quite, no, you're like, no.
Oh my God, I can feel it coming.
For me, I was just craving that stillness and that silence. My children were quite young still at the time. And so just to give myself an hour completely to myself was just the best present ever. But what ended up happening was there was so much more noise that I wasn't really anticipating. And I had to I call it like a pressure cooker for meditation. I had to remember my meditation practices and sort of reignite this spiritual part of myself. And when I was, going through all the different chakras as I was floating there, when I got to my heart, this pain, this suffering that I'd been putting myself through for all these years really was calling out to be healed. And I had no choice but to like figure it out, because I knew I couldn't continue on like that, because there was a block. And if I was gonna, be the person that I needed to be for, the next 40 years of my life, hopefully, I needed to release that. And so the writing that I was doing kept repeating itself in terms of this experiential piece. And I'm like, okay, I have to acknowledge that this experiential piece is what needs to be written. And so that's ended up becoming what is the book now. And I think once I acknowledged, and my husband was really helpful in terms of pointing this out to me, but he said, suicide is something that really triggers you and you're very sensitive about it. And I'm like, am I? I didn't think I was. Doesn't everybody respond this way to suicide? It's an uncomfortable thing. But he's like, no, you're particularly like sensitive about it, because if it was brought up in a TV show where someone talked about it casually, or how it was sort of communicated, I would have such a physical and like often emotional reaction to it. And so when I found this one book about suicide survivors, it really informed me about the grief that I hadn't processed. I didn't realize that I wasn't processing my grief. I sort of thought I'd done it in my own way. And I mean, I knew that I thought about Michael every day. That was just my life. That's who I was. I was accepting that, but I wasn't telling people that. It wasn't, something that I was open about. And it wasn't until I started being open about the fact that I had this person in my life that, I loved, and we'd had this incredible connection, and they died by suicide, that I realized that by saying that and opening that space, being vulnerable about it, created a space for other people to share their own experiences. And I think that's been one of the most beautiful gifts of this whole process is being able to allow other people to open up about the people that they've lost.
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking your deprivation tank would have been a lot like COVID, the kind of COVID experience of isolation. And I mean, grief has gone off the scale in my work around COVID, in terms of, it's triggered so much grief that people thought was dealt with, or is just they've blocked down, and it's now come up. And so that was one point. I can see that, but also by you expressing and talking about your grief and gradually and layer. Your book is beautiful in bringing out the layers of grief, and I've got this real you've talked about it, touched on it before, about Michael like being there with you and almost bringing up things for you to find out, like the details. I've got this thing about details for this episode. Christian was the same. I wanted to know everything about his past life, things that I didn't know about him at uni, from his friends, just getting his sort of life story, and then wanting to know everything about what happened in Africa and tracing it. And you had the same kind of thing. And I do believe Michael was there sort of helping you uncover all these things.
Yeah. It's been such an interesting journey that way. And it's like, oh gosh, I feel like the more I embrace him in spirit, the more sort of bubbles up about him. And there's been these connections that I've made with friends of his, and other people that knew him in his life, and they are sharing bits of information about him that I never knew. And so I'm learning about him more as a person from other people's experiences, the more open I am about him. And I think that's one of the most, it's such a fun is such a silly word. I mean, but like, it's really exciting to like have those, have that information sort of like surface, like, and a lot of it's funny. It's not linear the way that it's coming up. Like his, the article that was published about him in, on the day of his memorial was very descriptive, of course, about who he was. And I only just uncovered that recently, like within the past month or so. I didn't even know that it existed until now, but I can only believe that I was led to find that. And then within that, I even found another photo of him in about a year, I think, no, 2 years from before he passed. And then people that know him, it's so interesting to me because like for almost 2 decades, really, it's been quite silent, and there hasn't been a lot of talk about him. And now there's more, sort of this resurgence now of who he was and how he impacted people, and just little glimpses of like he used to do. He did a inventory of native plants in Nevada. He contributed to this book or something. And like, I never knew that, like, I wouldn't have known that. And so my sense is, and I fully believe the more I share my story about him, the more other people are going to be able to share their stories about him too. And so there's just sort of this wealth of information, this fountain of knowledge that's starting to flow around him and his experience and how he touched people. And yeah, it's really joyful to be able to just like look into his life and know how many people loved him on such an incredible level. So yeah,
I know. I've had obviously people come to me for guidance with suicides, and it's amazing how many families don't celebrate, they just don't know how to celebrate after a suicide, or there's just so much pain and hurt, and it's almost, you, like you were saying, you can't speak their name, or it's just a very shrouded in, it's such a difficult death. And interesting you using the word suicide survivor for anybody who is connected to the person who committed suicide. And do you get a feeling of what Michael is trying, do you get a feeling of what he's trying to say to you, to explain, to get you to understand his sort of mental state, maybe with the bipolar or anything like that?
Yeah, I do. That's been a big question for me during this whole process, is like, what is bipolar? What was the experience that he had? Because I mean, when him and I dated, he was such an optimistic person and so spiritually connected, so kind and so gentle, and really kind of really quite larger than life. And there was one time when we were together in Yosemite that I realize now, looking back, that I think he was depressed. I just thought that it was sort of a fault of our relationship, and I took it personally that things weren't working out between us. But really, I think what had happened is he was starting to struggle with this depression that he was going through, and he really lost his smile. He lost the sort of the spark in his eyes. They went dark, like a dark blue, as opposed to the quite the crystal blue that they were. And not knowing what to do at the time, other than to just sort of like leave him be. I wonder, like, what after that time that we spent together, like, I wonder what his life looked like in those 2 years after we dated, because I learned after his passing that he had been hospitalized numerous times and had other suicide attempts. And even though him and I communicated occasionally during that time, he never ever told me about the depth of his struggles. I really didn't know how much pain I'm, assuming he was in. And so, I've read other books about people and their bipolar struggles and what that looks like to be manic and to be depressed. And there's the middle state in between too. And I think he's really led me to those stories in order to help me understand what it was that he did go through during that time. I've also met people that have talked about bipolar disorder in the sense that it is our label for something else that's going on in kind of our Western society. And this is something that I'm still trying to figure out. And, I kind of put it out there if anybody has any better understanding of it in the sense that like if Michael was such a spiritual or connected person and he was on this path to, ascending, that it had happened so rapidly for him that he couldn't process. And so there was sort of this negative energy that sort of took that he took on in this body, but in a sense his spirit had already sort of moved on to another place. And so in Western medicine we often medicate that and try and balance it because we don't understand it. But when I was traveling in West Africa for university, I met a fetish priest who was in his community. He was really revered as someone with wisdom and knowledge and power. And I had the opportunity to sit down with him and interview him. And he showed me, the different shrines that he had for the spirits that would enter him. And when he first had this possession, I guess as he would call it, he was studying, or he was practicing to become a police officer, and ended up, naked in the streets, and people had to carry him off. But they recognized, like his community recognized, that there was something more powerful going on for him, and took him and he studied to become this priest that he was. And so I think if he was living in a Western culture, he would have been diagnosed with a mental illness and medicated or locked up or something like that. But because he was in Africa or West Africa, it was treated differently. And so I can't help but wonder if there's a similarity between those experiences and what Michael was going through and what Comfort had experienced. And so, there's still so much more of that puzzle that I would like to figure out. And I do feel like I'm slowly collecting the pieces of that to put together and have a better understanding.
Yeah, it's funny how you've been collecting the story and making sense of it like that jigsaw, which is exactly what I've been doing. I want to sort of touch on, so we've talked about sort of Michael and his story that you've been able to sort of put together and to celebrate him as well. There's this big thing about being able to now celebrate him and talk about him openly and freely and remembering like celebrating him rather than the death and the all the heavy stuff. But for you, when you talk about how have you gone from feeling like your life has, like, all the joy has gone out, you now cannot like move on with your life in the same way? How have you moved to where you are now?
It's been so lovely, and I'm so grateful that it happened, because it's been a true transition. I mean, I kind of talk about it as like transitionary grief and or transformational grief, I think is the word that popped up in my head. And through the acknowledging that first of all, I was frozen in my grief, and then to really like own that aspect of myself, I really went through a spiritual awakening in the process. And I think the grief sort of triggered that awakening. I kind of like to say that three things happened in order for that awakening to begin. And one of them was that I had to take responsibility for my life and my choices. The second was that I believed that everything is energy. And the third was that I lost someone close to me that I loved. And it wasn't necessarily in any particular order, but those three sort of fundamental pieces came together for me to have this awakening. And it's been just an everyday process, everyday learning and growing. And so much of that has been to turn inward and look for the answers within, right? I kind of think of my life like in these stages, like from, being born to, well, maybe not quite born, but at some point till I was 40, I was really just reacting to life. And I was looking externally for everything, looking externally for the answers. And then, after this, and during this awakening, I had to like turn inward, and instead of reacting to life, I realized I had the power to create life that I was having. Of course, now my dog's going to want to.
I'm surprised our puppy's not running around on the up above. So yeah, that's fine.
Sorry. So, yeah, the really huge learning that I had was that the grief that I felt for Michael was equal to the love that I felt for him. And I really placed that, I guess, on a pedestal, like I couldn't have that love if I didn't have him, right? And so with him gone, I couldn't have that level of love in my life anymore. But I realized that like the love that I felt for him was equal to the love that I had for myself. And so once I was able to claim that back and not displace it on him as though he was the only, he was responsible for it, and instead I was responsible for that love, then everything shifted. Like I found joy again, right? And I've been able to like return to it, and I can summon that higher vibration, that experience within myself. And it's been so incredible. Like and this is the piece that I really want to share with people. It's just like we all have it within ourselves to feel that amount of unconditional love towards anything. And the more we're able to sit in that within our own beings, the more we see it reflected back to us in every interaction and every experience that we have. And so, this whole process has been so incredible. And the thing that also just blows my mind and fascinates me, and you're such a good example of this, is like, I've had this journey pretty much in isolation. I'm a very like personal, like independent person. And I mean, since I started writing my book, I've just really sort of like locked myself in my house as often as I can to be able to tap into this. And so that's been going on for 4 years or so. And I've been meeting all these other people that have had a similar experience, and finding, these same sort of like markers of like gratitude and so many similarities that they've uncovered, but from their own path, and we're all meeting at this same place and having this similar experience, but all from completely different places. And I'm just overwhelmed by that union that's going on, and like the similarities in our experiences are just brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously doing this podcast, I'm meeting a lot of people are coming my way now, and you can see the similarities all the way along.
Yeah.
What do you think, this is kind of like a big question, but what do you think we as a group of people who've been through really difficult deaths, which is essentially what it is? I mean, you know, other Earth, I've done a lot of research, but other Earth-based communities, if there was a difficult death, you know, like a suicide or, you know, like with Christian going missing or a murder or something like that, it would actually be up to the families to do a grief ritual themselves, because it was almost like it was so out of the ordinary. But all of us now coming together who have difficult deaths to have moved through, to have found our own sort of grief rituals, do you see we now have a purpose together to help others to process?
I think one of the sort of reoccurring things for me is just to face what's uncomfortable, and to realize that the things that are uncomfortable in our lives are of our greatest learning, and to really reframe how we look at death and how we look at our relationship with spirit, and really question what that is. I mean, one of the biggest learnings again has been for me to question my own beliefs, and to really be conscious of the thoughts that I have at any given time, and like a thought that we keep thinking just becomes a belief. Like a belief is just a thought we keep thinking, and so knowing that, I've really had to challenge, you know, what is it that I believe about death? What is it that I, you know, believe about really everything? And I think it's like I'm in such a different space around what death is, and I really want to be able to help spark those conversations with people about loss and dying, and you know, leading up to dying, because it's so uncomfortable to have those conversations, generally speaking. And you know, I feel like I'm been sort of given this I guess a gift, or like just this place of understanding where I can facilitate those conversations from a different place. And I think there's so much to be gained as a society if we can have these discussions more openly, and not with that layer of guilt and shame and discomfort and everything that goes along with it, you know? So yeah, more than anything, I think it's just a matter of like just pushing that discussion forward and getting it out in the open. And like I said to my girlfriend the other day, like kind of out of the blue, but I'm like, you know, tell me about your dead people, you know, how are they doing? How are they showing up for you? You know, what did they tell you today, and where are they at? And
yeah, I think that's brilliant, because it's kind of normalizing you know, what has happened to us, and what we've discovered, and we both of us have made the decision, you know, like we have to take responsibility for our grief. We have to like find a way through this, because we do not want our lives to be like this forever, you know. We have to do something about it. And I think you know, you and myself and maybe all the guests we've had on so far, it's like actually standing up and talking and telling your truth, and that is how we're going to change. And also I'm kind of feeling that is the most tribute, respect, whatever we could ever give to Christian and to Michael, you know, for their deaths, what they went through. they went through that for a reason. And for us, the twin flames, whatever, the loved ones, to take that forwards and to honor them, and to live with them still in joy, because they're still there, they're still active, they're still so much part of our lives, and to really make their deaths count.
Yeah. Well, and that reminds me, like, when I was researching twin flames, so much of it was just about the purpose being to share the love with the rest of the universe, with the world, and so knowing that, it made so much sense to be able to, like, really embrace the love that I shared with Michael, and still experience, and be able to take that somehow, and if that's our purpose as him in spirit and me in this life, is to move that message of love and self-love and the power that it holds for people. Like, I'm all for that. I mean, that's just such an incredible gift to be able to share with people. And so when I know that I can embody it and hold that space for other people, then people just rise up to that energy, and it's just, you just feel it, right? It's so beautiful. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That is just, we've totally run out of time. I just wanted to get you I knew there was something special that had to come out at the end, and that was it. Oh, thank you, Kerri, so much for coming on the podcast. I so appreciate it, and it's been a joy to have you, and I hope our relationship will carry on and evolve as it is supposed to. I'm sure.
I know it's supposed to. Yeah. Absolutely.
So if people want to find out more about you, they go to your website, which is, very quickly,
KerriScott.com, KERRI Scott.com.
Okay, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Kerri, for joining us. And thank you. That is the end of this episode. I have no idea what's happening in the next week. We'll have to wait and see, but I'm sure it'll be exciting. So lots of love, and I hope you have a very good week. Okay, bye. Thank you for listening to The Finder of Lost Things. I think we've been triggered so long and so hard by COVID, and it's going to carry on. People are getting used to stillness, and they're getting used to more solitude. But how do you use that time for the highest good? This process that we're going to explore will bring back the joy and purpose to life. That wholeness, that sort of harmony and flow and togetherness. People are really ready to find their lost parts now. You can find me at hannahvelton.online.
Views expressed on this program are those of the host, guests, and callers, and do not necessarily reflect the views of the station, its management, or advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio.